Welcome to TEC Canada's Deeper Insights webinar series. I'm Natalie Kelly, Chair Support Supervisor at TEC Canada, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's session. For this webinar, I have the privilege of hosting Eddie LeMoine, a best-selling author, international key speaker, and Canadian-born expert in leadership, employment engagement, and the psychology of success. Eddie's impressive track record includes leading diverse teams and excelling in competitive environments. He is highly sought after for his expertise in changing demographics, diversity, and performance development, and was recently presented with TEC Canada's 2022 Speaker of the Year Award, highlighted in the profound impact of his insights on the personal and professional growth of our members. Today, Eddie will share insights on navigating the talent gap, how aging population and immigration are reshaping the Canadian workforce. Throughout the webinar, you will become equipped with his deeper insights and strategies to thrive in the face of these changes and bridge that talent gap in your organization. But here's where it gets even more exciting. We want to hear from you, whether you're joining us on TEC Canada's LinkedIn live event or on Zoom. Please utilize the live chat feature to submit your questions and comments for Eddie throughout the webinar. This is your chance to actively engage in the meaningful dialogue, gain personalized insights, and receive expert guidance on how to navigate the talent gap effectively. Without further ado, let's dive into the insightful content and extend a warm welcome to Eddie LeMoine. Welcome, Eddie.
All right, thanks. Thank you very much. You know, this is an interesting and very timely topic, and I look back at 2022, I did about 125 flights back and forth across Canada, and I don't believe there's a corner of the country or an industry that's not being impacted by or not being influenced by the aging population. So I'm going to dig into it. Kind of, one of the things I like to do is kind of scare you a little bit with some of the numbers. And one of the reasons why I do that is I like for people to walk away realizing that there's some real challenges on the horizon, and this isn't something that's going to go away anytime soon. And what I, obviously in 45 minutes, we're not going to boil the ocean, but if I can get you to think a little bit about the way you manage people, the way you attract and retain employees, and then I've done my part and move you a little bit in the right direction. Now, I find there's two questions everybody's asking me right now. And the first question that everyone is asking is, what's it going to look like as we're coming out of this pandemic? And, the one thing we know for absolute certain, it's never going to go back to the way it was. Now, interestingly enough, we are at a place right now where we were going to get to anyway, but it was probably about 6 or 7 years down the road. But some interesting things happened during the pandemic. And those things were all about the aging demographics and immigration. And so everything we do over this next 45 minutes, we're going to look at it through that lens. But the one thing for sure, this everyone back to the office type of scenario, it's just not going to happen. In fact, it's probably the most polarizing issue that I find as I travel across the country. But here are the facts. 50% of the workforce right now have gone back to work in a full-time basis the way it always was. However, 50% of the workforce are either in a hybrid work environment or they're working fully from home. Now, that's not going to change. The numbers might change. It might go 60-40. It might even go 70-30. But there's always going to be a component of this work from home scenario. Now, we were going to get there anyway, and the population and the aging demographics was going to drive us there. But some very interesting things happened during the pandemic that we didn't see coming that kind of accelerated that. So I'm going to dig a little bit into that. Now, the next question everyone asks, and I mean everybody's asking this question. Literally the other day, I'm in a lineup at a coffee shop, and there's a lady in front of me, and she heard my wife and I talking about this because I was ready to go on a stage in a city here in Canada. And the lady turned around and she said, well, where did everybody go? So I want to share with you where everybody went during the pandemic and why we're at the place that we are right now. So I think it's really important that we kind of look at the numbers. And the next couple slides really tells the story. And the big part of it is really the aging population. So for the last 100 years, if you needed to hire someone, this is what it looked like. You would run an ad, maybe you ran something on LinkedIn, or you ran an ad at Indeed or Monster, or you just put a billboard out in front of your building and said hiring laborers or forklift drivers. And you would hire people and you would promote them through your organization. They become mid-level technical resources or managers, and then they become senior people in your organization, and off they would go and retire. Now, you couldn't fail for the last 100 years, because if we looked at the growth of Canada, the way that it grew was up until 1935, the workforce was predominantly the male-driven workforce. In 1935, when men went to war, women entered the workforce. So we had another group of the population enter the workforce. Now, when the men came back from the war, many women exited the workforce, and we had this baby boom population. When the baby boomers turned about 14 years old, women flooded back into the workforce again, to where we are right now, where we actually have more women working in Canada than men. So we went from a one gender predominant workforce to a two gender workforce and a very large baby boom population. So basically for the last 100 years, you couldn't fail. If you were hiring someone, the numbers are in your favor. But this is what it looks like if you're trying to hire someone in Canada now. If we look at new hires in Canada, it's really made up of two different groups. One would be Z generation entering the workforce, and the second one would be immigration. Now, if you look in the workforce now, millennials have found their way. In fact, you'd be hard pressed to even find something negative about a millennial when you Google them. They're becoming the next level of executives and vice presidents and presidents of companies. Baby boomers have started to kind of exit and retire, and the X generation has taken on a lot of those positions. In fact, a lot of baby X generations have been disproportionately promoted. I recently spoke to an energy company where there were 450 managers in the room, and 46% of them were the X generation. However, the X generation only make up about 21% of the population. So, if you go back and you look at this one, I mean, as a manager, as a hiring person for the last 100 years, you could not fail. If you look at this one, it takes a whole different skill. It takes a whole different skill to lead and manage and attract and retain employees when the numbers are not in your favor. And that's what we're going to talk about. How do we get to where we are right now? So the aging phenomena is a very, very interesting thing in Canada. In fact, we have the highest per capita baby boom population in the world. Not the highest baby boom population, but the highest per capita. So we were kind of the friskiest group of people when we got back from the war. So, and we suppressed immigration for many, many years in Canada. So we're going to pay a bit of a dear price for that as we start to head into the next few years. But I want to walk you through this, but I wanted to do it in a way that we're looking at it from a population perspective as it pertains to the baby boomers. So now, not that long ago, I was delivering a presentation in Burlington, Ontario, and I was heading back to the airport, and I was listening to CBC, and they were interviewing somebody from Census Canada, and they were talking about all the old people that we have in Canada. And I could tell that the Census Canada person was a little bit annoyed with the CBC person, because it was almost like she was surprised that we have all these old people. And Census Canada person said, you know what, this was so predictable. But the one thing that she said that really stuck out in my mind was baby boomers never did what we expected them to do at any given time in their life. And as we go through this, I'll talk to why that has such a big impact on what's happening right now, both in immigration, but also in the job market in Canada. So back in the 1950s, 1960s, baby boomers were under the age of 14, and we built tens of thousands of schools and pediatric wards and baby food manufacturing facilities. It's when we realized this was a big deal. Now, in the 1960s and 1970s, something very interesting happened. Baby boomers started to come of age. And at this particular time, something different happened to this generation that's not happening to the same age group in the workforce today. So on average, if we were to go back to the 1960s, 1970s, it would be uncommon or not uncommon for a baby boom family to have 4 or 5 children. So you would have 4 or 5 siblings. But to be totally truthful, it wasn't uncommon to have baby boom families that had more than 10 children. Well, we currently produce 1.4 children or 1.5 children per one female or 1.6, depending on whose stats you're looking at. But we have this declining population now. But what was interesting back then is because with small houses, big families, people moved out relatively early. In fact, most baby boomers moved out of their house at around age 16 or 17. And when they went to the workforce, many baby boomers only changed their careers 3 times in their whole life. My father went to work for Sears and he was 15 years old. And he actually stayed with Sears until he retired with a full retirement at 54 years old. So, but if we look at young people entering the workforce right now, many of them will stay home much later. On average, up until 2008, if you had a Z generation, or back then it would have been even a millennial living with you, they were going to stay with you until they're 28 years old. Now, why is that so different than the baby boomers? Well, a big part of it is the life expectancy of a Z generation when they enter your place of employment right now is that they'll stay with you less than 18 months. And they'll change their careers multiple times in their life with an average span of, as time goes on, they'll obviously stay longer, but in the initial stages, we'll see changes anywhere from that 18 months to 3 to 5 years. So it's a bit of a moving target. Now, what's really interesting is I was in Ottawa and I was speaking to a group of folks, and there was somebody in the audience and they said, Eddie, it's interesting you would say that, because when we hire people now, we only hire them for 2 years. And I said, explain what you mean. And he said, well, what we do, he said, we know that we turn our staff quite regularly. So we tell them, if you give us 2 years, we'll help with your resume. We'll even help you find your next job. Now, this was a technology company. And I said, really? I said, you'd invest in them for a 2-year period? And he said, oh, no, absolutely, we would. He said, but we make our place compelling enough that they'll stay a little bit longer. And I said, well, how's it working out? He said, most stay well beyond 2 years. But he said, what we do is we open the door for them to come in. But what it really means is that your onboarding has to be fast. You have to hit the ground running. Gone are the days of hiring someone and waiting 5 or 6 days before you give them access to the network, or telling them, why don't you sit in the office for a little while, look at the web and Google around, and tomorrow we'll set you up with lunch with Harold because he's been here for 15 years. The reality now, when you hire someone in your organization, you have 53 hours before they start to have buyer's remorse and feel that maybe they went to work for the wrong place. So you have to really hit the ground running. So now in the 1970s, 1980s, baby boomers really started to find their way in the world. They started to become young supervisors, get married, have children. And then something interesting happened the next year. In the 1980s and 1990s, baby boomers started to spend money like drunken sailors. Now, some of you that are on this call, especially people that might be in the Alberta area, at the time, we drove interest rates well into double digits, and you had what was called jingle mail. Jingle mail is when people would mail their keys back to the bank, because the chattel mortgages at the time, they could either sue for the mortgage or they could sue for the house, but they couldn't do both. And you also had a phenomenon called dollar homes, where people would buy a house for $1 and assume the mortgage, rent those houses out for 6 months, and then send the keys back to the bank. Very interesting time. But baby boomers spent a lot of money because they enjoyed symbols of success. But what nobody was thinking about at this exact same time was this group right here. And this is the X generation. Now, the X generation is a negative growth generation. Not saying X people are negative people. You're a negative growth generation. And it's the first time it's ever happened in our country. And it happened in all the G7 countries. And this is a big deal. But it's not like a sexy 4-year election cycle kind of big deal. So nobody really thought about it until we started to approach where we are now. But let me walk you to the next 10 years. So if we go back to 1990s to 2000, something very interesting happened during this time that's having a massive impact right now on the job market in Canada. So in the 1990s to 2000, baby boomers ramped up their spending to a whole other level. And they went out and they bought very big homes. So it's not uncommon for a baby boomer to have a 4, 5, 6 bedroom house. with on average 1.5 children. So these big homes, but some very interesting things also happen. One is they built these big homes with virtually no storage in them. So they started storing things outside of the homes. And I think it's around a $43 billion a year growth market in storing stuff. So now the other interesting thing with baby boomers, they got a little bit forgetful and they forgot they stored stuff in storage units. So we have a bunch of television shows like Storage Wars and Pickers and so on. But what nobody was thinking about and what really happened here that's having a big impact is in the 1990s to 2000, everyone predicted that the baby boomers would downsize, that their family would start to become empty nesters, and they would sell those homes to the next generation coming along, which would have been the X generation. The X generation in turn would sell their homes to the Y generation. The Y generation would either sell their starter homes and move out of apartments and allow those apartments for Z generation and immigration. And it didn't happen. It did happen for like a New York minute, especially in provinces like Ontario, where baby boomers started to sell their homes and move into condos. But what happened was the baby boomers were so young at heart, the thought of living in a condo at that time in their life just didn't seem like something they wanted to do. And I think of my own grandmother at one point sitting on the beach in front of her cottage at 55 years old. She was an old lady at 55 years old. Now, my grandmother passed away at 106. She looked identical at 106 than what she looked at 55. I'm 61 years old. I race mountain bikes. I go to the gym 3 times a week. So we're a younger baby boom population. So what happened was baby boomers not only didn't sell their homes, they started buying and selling their homes to each other and started to price that house out of the market. So now we have all these baby boomers living in these big homes that they didn't sell. And now the X generation and the Y generation, it's prohibitive for them to be able to afford those homes. And it has created a housing crisis. And that is a real big deal in Canada, because there are cities now in Canada that if a company wants to hire someone, they have to find a place for them to live. In fact, areas like Northern Alberta and the northern parts of the prairie provinces, they've been doing housing employees for years. But now we're seeing it in the fishing industry, in the agriculture industry, and the tourism industry, where if you want to hire people, you also have to find a place for them to live. So in the 2000 to 2010, baby boomers started to think about their retirement. They're going to retire. They're going to go on a cruise somewhere. But if you look behind, you'll see that there's very few people coming behind the baby boomers to support this as they start to head into their retirement. Again, not a sexy 4-year election cycle, but it is a big deal when it hits you, and it now has hit us. So if we look at where we are right now, the population between the ages of 55 and 64 will increase by 73%. The population above the age of 65 will increase by about 53%. And if you look at the population coming behind us to support that aging population, it's not there. Now, we've also suppressed immigration, which has had a big impact. So a couple things. One is, I believe there's tremendous opportunity. And I think for a couple of reasons. I believe if you're on this webinar now and you're younger and you're early in your career, you will see opportunities that no generation before you has ever experienced. I see it for my children, but I also believe there's tremendous opportunity right now for managers and leaders that are worth their salt and they're good leaders, because we rewarded poor leadership and poor management for the last 100 years. But when I look to the future, the competition for the future is not going to be for finding clients. It's going to be for finding people. And the companies that find the people and retain the people will get the customers. In fact, one of the things I hear over and over again from audience members is, when we win a piece of business, we're not even sure if we can deliver it anymore. So it's not running around the office ringing a bell saying, we won a deal, we won a deal. Now it's, we win a deal and we slide it under the deck and hope the employees didn't realize that we won another piece of business. We're going to have to ask them to work just a little bit harder. So where did all the people go? Well, you're driving home on Friday and you're thinking to yourself, somebody just laid off 6,500 workers, and you're thinking, wow, like that's a lot of people. But when you're driving home on Friday, I want you to think that 8,500 Canadians turned 65 years old. Now, it doesn't mean that all 8,500 retired, and it doesn't mean that all 8,500 were actually working. But in Canada, there's a very good chance, because we are a fully employed population, there's a very good chance that a big chunk of that number are turning 65, are in the workforce. Now, traditionally, it doesn't necessarily mean that they retire, but one of the interesting things that happened during the pandemic is more people retired during the pandemic at age 65 and before than would have other years. And a lot of times it's because they were like, you know what, I'm done. I'm not doing this. I'm not Zooming. I don't feel safe. I don't want to be working. I can retire. And for people that were eligible to retire, we were seeing people retire at 62, 63, or 60. And in fact, my father, when he retired at 55 or 54. So we know that we had lost a tremendous amount of baby boomers during the pandemic. Probably somewhere between 900,000 and 1.1 million people exited the workforce. So the population of seniors 65 and older grows 6 times faster than children between the ages of 0 and 14. So if you look at the workforce in Canada now, every single new net job, not every job, every single new net job in Canada is going to be filled by somebody who's currently not living in our country. So we will become a super diverse country. And that's why when I even look at EDI strategies within organizations, now it's really about finding people, and a diverse workforce is not something that a box that you need to tick off. A diverse workforce right now is something that's an absolute necessity as we move forward. So Natalie, I see you popped up. Do we have a question?
We do, thanks. So we do have a question. Eddie, how do you reconcile the war on talent with impact of AI on jobs?
So I do have some slides on AI. Do you want me to answer it now, or do you want me to wait till I get to the slides?
Well, if you're going to get to it, we can definitely wait to it.
Okay.
Wait for that, if that works. And just encouraging everybody, if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll ask Eddie. Thanks, Eddie.
No, awesome. But I will say, a lot of people look at AI as a threat, and obviously it is going to be a threat in certain jobs as we kind of move forward. But we're at a place right now where we have about 8 Canadians supporting everyone retired as the baby boomers start to exit and head into their retirement. And we're going to go to a place by about 2040 where theoretically there would only be 2 Canadians working for everyone retired. And the only way that we'll be able to do it is through AI or automation or so on. So I think a couple of things to think about. One is, during the pandemic, we saw like grants that the government would give you to hire people, or wage subsidy grants. I don't think in our careers we'll probably ever see anything like that again, because I think if you want to work in Canada now, there's a job. But I think what you will see the government do in the future, because they know this is a crisis, is automation grants. And we're already seeing it with the digital transformation type grant that's happening right now. So if you don't look at it as a negative thing, when I get to the slides, we'll talk a little bit more. AI, I think, is going to be the thing that allows us, many companies, to stay in business as we kind of move into the future. So I want to dig a little bit more into the numbers, and I'm definitely going to come back to AI because I love that question. And again, please bring on the questions, because I do enjoy that, and I do enjoy the challenge. So the current jobless rate in Canada is about 5.1%. It's hovering up and down. It went down as low as 4.9. It might pop up to around 5.3, but the reality is 5% is considered fully employed. So when you hit 5% jobless rate, it means that the jobs that are available in Canada and the people that are looking for work have already maxed out. So now sometimes it's geographical differences, like you might have a welder in Southern Ontario that is employable in 5 other provinces and hundreds of jobs, but their spouse has a good job in Southern Ontario and they're not prepared to move to another part of the country. But the reality is, once we get down around that 5%, you get pretty desperate to find people. Now, the number that scares me more is what's happening in the United States. In fact, I have a call with a group from California a little bit later this afternoon, and the jobless rate in the US right now is hovering around 3.6%. And the reason why that one scares me is the US are coming north of the border to find people. And I'll talk a little bit about how that's happening and the impact that's very different on hiring from other G7 countries that we didn't experience prior to the pandemic. So attracting talent will really become every organization's biggest concern as we start to head into the future. So now, if we look at immigration during the pandemic, it looks something like this. In the first year of the pandemic, we had about 184,000 immigrants move into Canada versus 341,000 in 2019, so the year before the first year of the pandemic. The number that nobody talks about is how many immigrants actually left Canada in the first year of the pandemic. And it was about 190,000 immigrants left. So we actually had a net negative number the first year of the pandemic. Now, the second year of the pandemic, the federal government will tell you about 401,000 immigrants moved into Canada, but the real number is closer to 220,000. The rest of them were already on the ground in Canada, but there was a backlog on the paperwork. So the paperwork allowed the number of 401,000. But for the employers that are on this call, it didn't give you more people moving into the country. But I want to dig into the immigration number just a little bit so that you truly understand what that means. So we know that we have this massive population in Canada retiring, and we know that they're pretty much fully employed when they're hitting that 65 years and they're heading off into their retirement. And we know that the Z generation that are entering the workforce are small in numbers and also not well trained at this point. So we have this, brain drain of very senior people that are exiting. But for every immigrant that moves into Canada, it doesn't mean they're employable. And I'll give you an example. There's probably some people on the call that maybe you need a mechanical engineer and you find the perfect one in Bangladesh. So you go to Bangladesh and you do all the paperwork and you're all excited. You bring this new worker into your organization. And when you pay them, the majority of their paycheck will go back to Bangladesh. Now, in Canada, we don't want that. We want that paycheck to stay in Canada. So we have a unification program. So we'll go to Bangladesh and we'll bring that family into Canada as well. So maybe we bring in a spouse and 3 children. The spouse doesn't speak English yet. The 3 children are under the age of 15. We brought 5 people into Canada, but only one of them is employable. Now, we're late to the dance on this. Other countries, other G7 countries have been doing this a lot longer than us, and they're benefiting from those 3 children because they will go through their education system and into the workforce. In our case, as we ramp up the numbers to 500,000 immigrants per year, it will take a few years for the overall benefit. So we're going to continue to see the baby boomers exit, but it's going to take a few years for immigration to catch up to it. Now, the other challenge we're going to have with immigration is the competition for good immigrant workforce is going to be global, and it's going to be all of the G7 countries. So we're not the only G7 country that has a declining population. All of them have a declining population. So we're all going to be in that same competitive boat to bring more immigrants into the workforce. Here are the numbers that scare me. So currently in Canada, we're probably down around 900 to 940,000 job vacancies in Canada right now. And this is why it's so different now versus back in 2007 when we had the other hot job market. Back in 2007, the job vacancies in Canada were about 360,000 and the jobless rate was around 5.7. The difference now is the jobless rate, even as we continue to raise interest rates and hope to cool down the job market, the unfillable jobs right now are almost 1 million. But that's not the number that scares me. It's the US. And right now it's around 10 million. So there are 10 million vacancies in the United States. And you know what? They're coming north of the border to find people. And they found a new way of doing it. And this is something we didn't see happen. So I see you popped up again. Do you have another question? I love this.
I do. So it says, hi, Eddie. What do you think are the career prospects for millennials? Oh, sorry. as well as their economic well-being in the next 5 to 10 years. If you can address the housing crisis and high inflation rate as part of your response, that would also be wonderful.
So that is an interesting question, and it's a very complicated answer. I believe that the millennials, because they were on the bottom end of a very large population, so the baby boomers were still fully employed when the millennials were entering the workforce, they were kind of sitting there waiting for the baby boomers to retire so they could work their way up into the workforce. It's your turn now. If we were to look at the future, and if we're going to get there, if we're going to go from 8 Canadians supporting every one retired to 2, we're going to get there through technology. And if there's a generation that truly understands technology better than any other generation in the workforce, it would be the millennials. Bar the Z generation will be very, very well versed, and the Alpha generation following them. But the millennials will be the generation that'll bring us to where we are. In fact, when I speak to groups now and I speak to leaders across Canada, a lot of my audience are millennials, so they are definitely finding their way. The housing crisis is a big deal. There are provinces in Canada right now where they've done studies, and they found that millennials have this hopeless feeling that they're never going to be able to own a home. In fact, I'm in a neighborhood right now in Nova Scotia where the majority of every single house that was sold in our neighborhood over the last 4 years were predominantly people from Ontario. So much so that it drove the housing price in our neighborhood almost up double from what it was 4 years ago. So the housing crisis is going to be a huge challenge, and every province will be faced a little bit different. In Prince Edward Island, where the aerospace industry is really hot right now, if somebody hires somebody, they have to find a place for them to live. So I believe there's tremendous opportunities for millennials in their career goals, but home ownership may be outside of a lot of people's reality unless, as the baby boomers start to leave their homes, and they will eventually, if that part of the market collapses, you might see a correction that will allow people to afford to move into their own homes. But I even think of it from my own children. They are going to struggle to find houses. So it might not be the answer you want, but I think career-wise, you're going to have tremendous opportunities for millennials as we kind of head into the future. So back to people recruiting from outside of Canada. So when we look at how we hire people now, traditionally, if you wanted to hire someone in another country, people would come into Canada and they would hire someone and get a work visa, and those people will go work somewhere else. But what's happened because of the pandemic, and because you can hire anywhere, work anywhere, what we're seeing in Canada is some of our absolute best resources are being recruited by other countries. Now, a lot from the US, but all the G7 countries are doing this. In fact, my daughter, who's a recruiter, she works for a US company. She's a Canadian. She lives here in Halifax. She told me one day, she said, Dad, she said, I'm hiring 300 people. And she said, a lot of the people we're going to hire will be Canadian. She said, but none of them are going to work for Canadian companies. They're all going to work for US companies and work remotely. So we're seeing this tremendous pressure on our knowledge workers to work for companies in other countries. So when I drive down the road in my neighborhood, not only are people, maybe not working for companies here in Nova Scotia, they're probably not even working for companies here in Canada now. So hire anywhere, work anywhere. And what it does is it puts us in a situation where we have to compete with wages of major centers. So I'm in Halifax, and maybe we pay someone $100,000 a year, and they're a billable resource, and we bill them out at $1,200 a day. They might get a job offer from somebody in New York, and they'll say, you know what? We'll pay you $150,000 a year US, and we're going to bill you out at $500 an hour in New York. So we have this competition from other parts of the world from a wage perspective. Nadia, I see you popped up again. Do you have another question?
I do. And we're talking about jobs, so it's perfect timing. So, given the influx of high skilled immigration, how do we stop the phenomenon of companies asking for Canadian experience on job applications?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I have to think back at probably back around 2008. I was given a presentation in Ottawa, and we were talking about the importance of uh, employee engagement and increasing productivity in an organization, retaining staff. And somebody came up to me and they said, you know, when is my CEO going to buy into this? And I said, when they walk out and the cubicles are empty and they're really struggling to find people. And I think that's what's happening now. There are organizations that truly understand that immigration is a strategy they absolutely have to have as part of their go forward scenario. So I think, if you're saying that you want Canadian only content, what you've done is you're really going to narrow down the amount of people that you can recruit. As with anything that limits the amount of people that you can recruit. Like, for example, if you were to announce that we're only going to work full on site, and we're not going to allow people to work remotely, a couple things happen. One is you've narrowed yourself down to 50% of the workforce, especially from a knowledge perspective, that will work on site, but you've also opened yourself to people recruiting within your organization to pick people that maybe might be working full-time on site, but might want to work 3 days a week at home, or maybe in a hybrid work environment, or maybe work for a company in another country, or so on. So I think the numbers will dictate it. There's parts of Canada right now that when I travel to, companies have given up on running ads because zero people apply. So I think the population of resources will dictate what companies ask for that Canadian content. So if you're an immigrant and you're looking at that and you're thinking, you'd like to see more companies not asking for Canadian, I think the numbers are in your favor. I think it's going to work out for you in the future. Not everyone working in your communities are employed in your communities, or even for Canadian companies. So this competition we have for wages. I want to do a little bit on AI, and I might have a couple more slides, and then I'm going to open it up to Q&A. So I'd like to have as much conversation going as we possibly can. So I know a lot of people are scared of AI. In our own company here, we're using AI every single day. We use ChatGPT all the time. We're looking for ways to integrate AI into everything we do, because it gives us a little bit of an advantage. I think a lot of people that are on this call would agree with that. So the Economic Forum says about 85 million jobs can be replaced with AI by 2025. A lot of experts believe that 40% of all jobs can be replaced in 9 years. So with technology, it's not all going to be AI. It could be, just technology in general, automation, those types of things. But we know that on the horizon, it's going to have a big impact. But it's like walking into your favorite store and you see a self-checkout and you're thinking they're taking jobs away. The reality is the self-checkout is there because they can't find people to operate a cash register. So we need the AI as part of the future. So despite that misconception, AI actually prompts a considerable spike in new positions in company, because if a company can grow through AI, it gives better jobs for people to be able to apply for. So the question isn't really if it's going to be AI or where automation is, it's where you're going to put it in your organization. So there's 3 things you want to look at when you look at automating in the future. And the first thing is you want to automate your dirtiest jobs that people don't want to do. And this works really well in industries like the agriculture industry and so on. We have apple orchards here in Nova Scotia that have robotic pickers. They can send these robots out. They scan the trees. They identify which ones are red apples, jobs that nobody else wants to do. Dangerous jobs are another really great way to look at automation and AI in your organization. But the area that I specialize in and I spend all of my time in You want to look at the jobs in your organization that are disengaging your employees, jobs that nobody wants to do because they don't enjoy doing them. So if we had a lot of time together, we'd talk a lot about what engagement means, but your engaged employees are more productive. They recommend your place as a place to work, and they don't leave. So what you want to do is you want to have your employees doing as much things as they enjoy doing at work, and less things that they don't enjoy doing or that disengages them. And that could be something as simple as pushing forms out into the internet and having your clients fill out forms, or automating remedial tasks within your organization. But dirty jobs, dangerous jobs, and disengaging jobs are the areas that you want to look at. I want to just finish on just a couple slides, just to give you a little bit of something to think about as you're going forward. There are 3 steps to closing the engagement gap. Now, again, if you engage more people in your organization, you'll attract more people, you'll build productivity, and you'll build capacity in your organization. Capacity building is a big, big buzzword you're going to hear for the next couple of years. It's how do we get more out of our current employee base? And you're going to do that through, things like EDI and technology and so on. And how do you leverage what you currently have to get more capacity? There's 3 things you want to look at doing with your team. One is you got to get to know them better. The second thing is you got to develop your team, and you want to do that by aligning their strengths with what it is you're trying to do. And the last thing is you want to motivate and inspire them. And I believe that the leaders that are on this call, it's important that you're part of motivating and inspiring people. So I'm not going to dig any deeper, because if we had more time, I would get into getting to know people a lot deeper. And there's 3 things you want to look at in getting to know people. One is you want to get to know people based on their gender, because the way we communicate and work and even inspire each other based on our gender is very different. The other thing that companies really have to start looking at right now is getting to know people based on their culture. And then when I talk culture here, I'm not talking about, like you have a good culture in your organization. When I talk culture here, it's really about immigration, that you understand their values, beliefs, what it takes to allow them to be successful, what their beliefs are, and those types of things. And then the last thing would be age. So for the first time in history, we have 5 generations working together. For many organizations like the restaurant industry, I spoke at a McDonald's conference just recently in Toronto, they have 7 generations that are walking in their door as customers every day. So one of the biggest disruptors in the workforce right now are the 5 generations working together, and a lot of unconscious bias around the 5 generations. So getting to know people based on their gender, their culture, and their age. And Natalie, I'm going to pull it back over to you, and we'll see if we got any questions, and I'm going to stop sharing.
Just a couple comments. Wow, this puts things into perspective. Thanks for sharing these stats. Great insight on not limiting ourselves in recruiting. Let's see what else. Excellent presentation. AI impact is very well addressed. Thank you, TEC, for bringing in this level of speaker and relevant knowledge. I could listen to Eddie LeMoine all day long.
Isn't that nice? But one of the things that people should really realize is, like, when I talk about hybrid work environment or people working from home, what you really want to be thinking about as you're going forward right now is that you're thinking out of the box the way everything is happening. And I'll give you an example. There's one of the ATV companies in the United States started a new shift at work where they hire people. Their shift starts at 10 in the morning and the shift ends at 2 in the afternoon. And they specifically went after the hospitality industry. Now in Canada, we saw 237,000 people leave that industry during the pandemic and move in other industries. But what they were doing is they were looking for people that wanted to drop their children off at school in the morning and pick them up and not have to pay for daycare. It was the most successful shift that particular company has ever had in their manufacturing facility. So you might be sitting there thinking, well, Eddie, my people they turn a wrench or they drive a truck. But what this has done is that we have to think out of the box. What are you doing to make sure you don't lose people out of your industry to go to other industries, because there might be opportunities for them to work in a little bit of a different environment. So it's not so cut and dry about hybrid work environment or working from home, so on.
Great. We do have another question here, a couple actually. So what are the biggest differences in gender that you see?
The biggest differences in gender? Well, actually, if you study genders, obviously the two big genders would be female and male. If you were to go back, and I might get it wrong, but like 20 years ago, the majority of all of the workforce was more men working than women. But if you look at the Canadian workforce right now, about 54% of the workforce are females versus 46% are males. And of the female workforce, there's actually more female managers in Canada than male managers in Canada. So we've seen this massive shift from a predominantly male-driven leadership to more female leaders. Now, I speak to groups all over Canada. What I find, and this is my observation, up to a VP level, we see a lot of women in leadership roles, but when we get to CEO level, we still see predominantly male-driven CEOs. But I believe that as the more and more baby boomers retire, you're going to see more women occupy those roles in the future. So I think that kind of glass ceiling will go away with the aging population as part of that. You're muted. Natalie, you're muted.
Can't believe I did that.
That's
Right,
okay.
sorry about that. What ways do you recommend for helping to ease the anxiety around AI taking jobs away?
Yeah, for me, I embrace AI. I find it a very positive thing, but for me, I truly understand the numbers. So I see it as a very positive thing. I think you want to look at it from that perspective. If you're an employee and they bring AI into an organization to replace menial jobs, it creates more opportunity for people to have better jobs. But there will be jobs that will be sacrificed by this. And I think back of a few years back, I remember visiting a kind of a renegade office in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, where there was a group of people in the telephone industry, and they were just coming out with the cell phone. And they said, someday people are going to have this device and no phone in their house. And everyone's like, that's never going to happen. But I mean, look at it. I mean, cell phones are our new reality. So AI is absolutely going to impact people's jobs, but it's also going to create a tremendous amount of opportunity as well. So you want to get on the right side of it. And I think our young people will be the ones that will really help us with AI in organizations. But it is scary. I mean, there's a lot to be said about it for sure.
Great. So with the innovations in tech being one promising way of bridging the talent gap, how do you see the growth of the tech sector itself being impacted by reduced 20 to 30-year-olds who predominantly develop such technologies? Will we face a plateau with the speed of development in the tech sector?
No, I come from the tech sector. So my background is technology. Until I became a professional speaker back in 2005, my whole life was in the tech. Some interesting things will happen with technology. I mean, the knowledge of the world doubles every 18 months. A child sitting in front of a computer right now can access more information in one night than all of their forefathers could as they walked on this planet for all of their lives. So technology will drive that in the future. I think technology is going to have a bit of a hard run for the next little while as companies, as their interest rates keep rising. So if I look at the job market, the one area where companies will have a reprieve will probably be technology, because in places like Silicon Valley, when the interest rates keep going up, some of those companies will evaporate and those people will look for a job. But currently, every time a company evaporates in Silicon Valley, those people get gobbled up pretty quick. So but I think there's great opportunity in technology. I mean, it's dear to my heart, and I would recommend my children to go into technology in the future.
Awesome. Just a comment here. So great presentation. Thanks to everyone, including our host and Eddie, for making this happen today. The question was, is this recording of the presentation going to be made available? The answer is yes. It will be available next week. You'll find it on our YouTube channel, and we'll share it as well. Another question here. What can SME businesses focus on to compete for talent?
Okay, so this is a very long, this could be a very long answer, but I want you to think about one thing. Employees ask 3 questions when they walk in the door. First question they ask is, why is this job important to me? And that comes down to things like paycheck, geography, vocation, location, benefits, and so on. The second question everyone asks is, who am I going to be working with? What's my boss like? What are my fellow employees like? Who do I interact with? And the third question is, what do you want me to do when I walk in the door? Now, the way they answer the questions is the first question, why is this job important to me? Paycheck, benefits, job. That's why they join. So employees will join you if you pay them right, if the benefits is right, the geography, those things. People stay if they like the people they work with. So if they like their boss, if they like their fellow employees, or if they like the people they interact with. They could even dislike their boss and like their fellow employees and the people they interact with. We see that in healthcare a lot, where people love the children they work with in the hospital, but they don't like shift work of their boss. The number one reasons why people leave companies right now is if they don't like what they're doing. So if you're hiring people and they don't like their jobs, or they don't like the activities they're doing, you'd be hard pressed to keep them. Now, this is very different than baby boomers. Baby boomers didn't leave for that reason. And even I remember my father would have a saying. He would say, suck it up, buttercup, it's work. It's not supposed to be fun. So, but the younger your workforce, the more important answering the third question is, that they're doing things they enjoy doing. So that is a half-day seminar on its own. But the bottom line is, people got to enjoy their job, and especially if you have younger employees.
Great. A couple more here, Eddie. In 9 years, with more AI jobs, what do you expect the majority of the workforce be doing or working in?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I don't even know that answer. I know that AI will replace task or certain jobs. But we also are going to a place where we have a very declining population, and we need that. But, like you go into a doctor right now and you say, I got a mark right here in my face. And the doctor goes, oh, Jimmy had a mark like that, and we tested it and it was this. I mean, you're going to go into a doctor soon, and they're going to scan that, and it's going to look at 5 million people who had marks similar to that and come back with a diagnosis. So we don't even know where AI is going to go in the future, and kind of what it will replace. But I wouldn't even know how to answer that, really. I think if you're a salesperson, there's an opportunity, but it's just so new, and it's going to happen so fast that it'd be hard to say what jobs are going to replace. I mean, we have robotic bumblebees now that are going pollinating plants. Like the world is going to grow so fast that it's hard to comprehend what's going to happen.
All right. What is your perspective on education due to info available from AI? So for an example, like the role of post-secondary education.
So that's an interesting question, but I want to approach this from a little bit different. Recently, I was speaking at a construction association conference in another province, and they said to me, Eddie, if you had told me that you were going to come in and talk to us about employee attraction retention 4 years ago, I told you were crazy. We're the second highest paid industry in the province. But the reality is right now, industry leaders that are on this call right now, if you want to recruit people for your industry in the future, you got to get out to the grade 8s. You have to recruit really, really young now. It's too late at grade 11 and grade 12 to go in and try and promote your industry as the industry to come and work in. You've got to get way, way out in front of this. So if you're trying to recruit the next generation, which I believe they're going to be called the alpha generation, technology is what they're going to want. In fact, there's more addiction centers in the Asian Pacific now for young people addicted to technology than any other type of addiction center. And it's because this generation is growing up so technical. So they're going to want to be working in organizations that have a lot of technology. So, I think you've got to get out really, really early, and you have to have something sexy enough to attract them to want to work in your industry.
Great, thanks, Eddie. One more here. When do you suppose we will have gender pay equity?
That's an interesting question. Everything is dictated by numbers. So we should have gender pay equity now. I mean, and I'm, to me, I for the life of me, I can't imagine why we would have two people doing the same job and not getting paid the same. And again, I believe it'll come down to the numbers. As the competition for resources gets stricter, people can demand more money, and hopefully it'll sort itself out. But that's a question bigger than I can answer. But I think the numbers will work in favor of immigration, young people, gender inequities in pay. Like the competition is going to get so hard for resources that people will have to pay them properly to hire them.
Great. Thanks so much, Eddie. And, thank you so much for joining us today. So just a reminder, we've got this recording will be available next week. You'll find it on our YouTube channel. You'll find it on our TEC Canada website. That's TEC-Canada.com. And yeah, this has been very, very insightful, Eddie. And I know we had a lot of really great questions, and we just really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of your knowledge and helping us grow.
It was my pleasure. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.